Dawn broke over Paris on August 10th, 1792, and Marie Antoinette woke to the sound of warning bells. Not the soft chimes of morning, these were alarm bells, echoing across the city like a death sentence. Outside the Tuileries Palace, thousands were gathering, National Guardsmen, armed citizens. Some of them are her former subjects. They were coming for her. Just 3 years earlier, she had been Queen of France in all her glory. Now, she stood behind barricaded doors, listening to the roar of a mob that wanted her blood. This wasn't just about removing a monarch. This was personal. They called her Madame d'Efficie. They accused her of betraying France to Austria. They blamed her for every empty belly, every broken promise, every failure of the old regime. Have you ever watched someone lose everything in a single moment? Have you seen what happens when public opinion turns into a weapon? When a crowd decides that one person deserves to suffer for the sins of an entire system? What happened to Marie Antoinette wasn't just an execution. It was a calculated destruction of her dignity, her identity, her humanity. And the worst part? The guillotine was merciful compared to what came before it. If you think you know how this story ends, stay with me, because what they did to her in those final months was far more brutal than any history book will tell you. Before we go further, hit that like button and subscribe to History Explore, because this is a story that demands to be remembered. The question is, was this justice, or was this revenge dressed up as revolution? After a failed escape attempt to Varennes in June 1791, trust between the crown and revolutionaries shattered completely. The royal family was imprisoned in the Temple fortress. Marie Antoinette was no longer called queen. She was simply Widow Capet, a deliberate erasure of everything she had been. On the night of August 2nd, 1793, officials entered the Temple prison and told Marie Antoinette she was being moved. No explanation, no warning. Before dawn, she was taken to the Conciergerie, a fortress on the Île de la Cité, with a reputation that made prisoners tremble. They called it the antechamber of the guillotine. Once you entered, you didn't leave alive. She was registered as Widow Capet. Not Your Majesty. Not even Madame. Just a name stripped of all meaning, all power, all humanity. Her cell was barely 3 meters by 2. Stone walls, iron bars, a single narrow window that let in more cold than light. The floors were damp. Rats scurried in the corners. Lice infested the straw she slept on. There was no bed, no comfort, no dignity. But the worst part? She was never alone. 2 guards were posted inside her cell, not outside, inside. They watched her every moment when she dressed, when she washed, when she tried to sleep. Revolutionary authorities ordered continuous surveillance without interruption. There was nowhere to hide, no moment of privacy, no escape from their eyes. Within weeks, her body began to fail. Prison doctors noted severe hemorrhaging, extreme weight loss, exhaustion. Her hair, once carefully styled and powdered, turned completely white. Observers who had seen her just months earlier barely recognized her. She looked decades older. She was cut off from her children. Her daughter later recalled their final embrace silent, because every word could be used against them. Marie Antoinette knew she would never see them again. In late September, she tried to smuggle a letter to her sister-in-law. It was intercepted. The words were simple, devastating. I have nothing left to hope for in this world. Think about that for a moment. A woman who once had everything, power, wealth, influence, now had nothing. Not even hope. Not even the basic dignity of privacy in her suffering. Was this necessary? Was this what justice looked like? Or had the revolution become something else entirely, something that fed on humiliation and cruelty? Drop a comment below. Do you think this treatment was justified, or did it cross a line? And if you're still with me, share this video, because this story gets even darker. On October 14th, 1793, Marie Antoinette was brought before the Revolutionary Tribunal. If you're expecting a fair trial, forget it. This was theatre, a performance designed to justify a decision that had already been made. The charges? Treason, conspiracy with foreign powers, undermining the revolution from within. But then came the accusation that shocked even hardened revolutionaries: incest. They claimed she had committed unspeakable acts with her own son, the young Dauphin Louis Charles.
I accuse you, citizen, of incest with your son, a crime against nature itself.
The evidence? Words extracted from a traumatized child who had been separated from his mother and placed under the control of her enemies. The courtroom was packed with spectators loyal to the Jacobins. Armed guards lined the walls. The atmosphere wasn't one of justice, it was a spectacle designed to humiliate and destroy. Marie Antoinette sat in a black dress and white bonnet. Her face was pale, her eyes sunken from months of suffering, but when the prosecutor read the incest charge aloud, she didn't break. She didn't plead. She simply said, "I appeal to all mothers." The room fell silent. Even her enemies hesitated. Because in that moment, she wasn't a queen or a symbol or a political target. She was a mother, and every mother in that room, every mother watching, understood exactly what she meant. But it didn't matter. The trial was never about truth. It was about revenge. The so-called evidence? Letters seized from a hidden safe in the Tuileries Palace. Most were ambiguous. Some were completely unrelated to her. None proved the accusations. But the Revolutionary Tribunal didn't need proof. They needed a conviction. After 2 days of testimony with no real defense, no witnesses called on her behalf, the jury returned a unanimous verdict: death by guillotine. She showed no reaction, no tears, no protests. She had known from the beginning how this would end. The verdict was read at 4 a.m. on October 16th. She had only a few hours left to live. Here's the question we need to ask ourselves. When does justice become vengeance? When does accountability turn into cruelty? If you think this matters today, hit that share button. Because history has a way of repeating itself. At 7 a.m. on October 16, 1793, Marie Antoinette was awakened in her cell. She was given a plain white chemise to wear. Her hands were bound tightly behind her back. And then came the final insult. Her husband, King Louis XVI, had been executed 9 months earlier in a closed carriage, afforded at least that small measure of dignity. But Marie Antoinette? She was placed in an open wooden cart, the same cart used for common criminals, the same cart used for thieves and murderers. The route from the Conciergerie to the Place de la Révolution was deliberately slow. The authorities wanted everyone to see her. They wanted the crowd to jeer. They wanted her humiliation to be public, total, and unforgettable. The journey took over an hour. Thousands lined the streets of Rue Saint-Honoré. Some shouted. Some stared in silence. Marie Antoinette sat upright, her gaze fixed straight ahead. She didn't flinch. She didn't look down. Even now, broken, exhausted, stripped of everything, she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. Her hair had been cut short by the executioner's assistant. It was customary before a beheading, but it was also symbolic. One more piece of her identity removed, one more indignity piled onto the rest. When the cart finally stopped at the scaffold, she climbed the steps. Her legs were weak, her body was failing. But she didn't stumble. As she reached the top, she accidentally stepped on the executioner's foot. Her final recorded words: "Pardon me, sir. I did not do it on purpose." An apology. In her last moment of life, facing the blade that would end her, she apologized. At 12:15 p.m., the guillotine fell. The crowd erupted. Vive la République! But witnesses noted something strange. A brief, uncomfortable silence before the cheers began. As if, for just a second, even the mob realized what they had done. Her body was thrown into a common grave at the Cimetière de la Madeleine, unmarked and forgotten. It wasn't until 1815, with the return of the monarchy, that her remains were exhumed and placed in the Basilica of Saint-Denis, where French royalty had been buried for centuries. Marie Antoinette's death wasn't just the end of a queen. It was the destruction of an entire order, a system built on divine right and inherited privilege. But it was also something darker. It showed how quickly revolution can turn from liberation into vengeance, how easily justice becomes cruelty when fueled by anger and fear. She was guilty of many things: ignorance, extravagance, detachment from the suffering of ordinary people. But did she deserve what happened in those final months? The humiliation, the dehumanization, the systematic stripping away of every shred of dignity. On the morning of her execution, she wrote a final letter to her sister-in-law. "I forgive all my enemies. I die in the hope that my death will unite my children." Forgiveness. Even after everything they did to her. Her story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. When does holding someone accountable become mob justice? When does righteous anger turn into something we can't control? Comment below. Did her death represent justice for the people, or the beginning of a new tyranny born from vengeance? If this story moved you, hit that like button, subscribe to History Explore, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because of the lessons of history, they're not just about the past. They're warnings for the future.